On this week's episode of TLC Connections, GT Freeman is joined by Alyssa Brouse. Alyssa is a licensed clinical social worker and dedicated mental health professional who's passionate about guiding individuals through life's challenges. As Vice President of School-Based Services at TLC, Alyssa leads a team of mental health professionals providing critical support to school districts and their students. With extensive experience in schools, hospitals, outpatient settings, and other clinical environments, Alyssa is uniquely equipped to support clients at various stages of life and care. Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoy the episode.
Welcome to TLC Connections, the podcast where educators, counselors, coaches, and community leaders come together to inspire change, one connection at a time.
Hello, Alyssa.
Hello.
How are you?
Good. How are you?
Thank you so much for joining us on the TLC Connections podcast.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Are you?
Yes.
Are you nervous at all?
I'm very nervous.
Why are you nervous?
I think it's always a little hard just to be put on the spot and to be asked questions. And, yeah.
Well, we're definitely going to ask some questions. So I'm going to jump in right to the first one. Tell us a little bit about your journey. How did you come into social work, and what was your motivation for choosing this career path?
That's a very long story. I'll try to find the best way to tell it in a concise way. So I actually had no intention of going to college. I had a little bit of a tumultuous childhood. None of my family went to college. It wasn't really a thing that happened in my world. So I moved out really young at the age of 17, my senior year of high school, and I worked while I was going to school. I worked in a hospital kitchen. It was a great job. I could pay my rent. I could, just have that sort of autonomy of having a job, and I really enjoyed it. So I did that for probably about a year after graduating, and at a certain point, I was just kind of looking around, and I said, I think I want more for myself. I saw some of the different people that I worked with. Some of them were my age, but many of them were, middle-aged and things like that. And I was like, I think I want to be an adult somewhere else. I think I want a little something more for myself. So I started exploring what my options were. I was like, what can I do? I don't really know anything about college. I never had these conversations before, and I had no one in my life to tell me what to do. So I started to do some research. I looked into community college, of course, because that is sort of the most affordable option, and I didn't have any financial resources. So I signed up for community college. I took some courses, and the course that really caught my attention was psychology, my intro to psychology course. I was learning about the brain. I was learning about trauma. I was learning about mental health. And all of a sudden, so many things in my world just started connecting. I just started to understand why I felt certain ways about certain things. I started to understand why people in my life were behaving certain ways, and it just clicked. And I was like, this is amazing. So, of course, I continued through my community college, and then I decided I would go and get my bachelor's in psychology. And my first job with my undergrad was on a psychiatric unit in a hospital, same hospital that I worked at in the cafeteria. I moved to the pharmacy while I worked on my undergrad, and then I moved to the psych unit when I got my bachelor's. And man, that really just continued to steal my heart. I loved working with people who had significant mental health difficulties, the connections that I was able to make in the hospital with individuals who were in some of the darkest moments of their lives. It just felt so special to me. It felt so rewarding. I really felt like I was finally in a place in life where I could exert this effort and feel really good about what I was doing. So that was healing for me, honestly.
So this was after your bachelor's?
After my bachelor's.
Not during school.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
So that was your first job?
Yep, my first job.
And then how long did you work before you went back to get your master's?
So I worked on the psychiatric unit for 4 years. I did some part-time work there, and I did some other work as well. I almost always had multiple jobs because I was living on my own. I was a landlord. I bought my first house at 21. I had to really be creative with how I came up with, how to live and survive and feed myself.
So on your own since 17,
Mhm.
and then a homeowner by 21.
Correct. Yes.
Wow.
And I was a landlord at 21
Wow.
too,
So
which
you rented out
yes,
part of what you bought.
I had a tenant. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, she paid my mortgage, so that was really nice so that I can
Wow.
use my extra cash from my job to pay for school. So while I was doing my undergrad, I worked 4 days a week and I went to school 3 days a week. So I never had a day off my entire undergraduate. Maybe, here and there when there was a holiday or something like that, I would have a day. But it was a grind.
Did you pay your way through school, or did you take on loans? Or?
I had to take loans. I couldn't afford all of it, but I did
Right.
pay a lot too because loans would only cover so much because I had an income. So I never was eligible for grants or anything, but I, would take out loans and pay the rest in cash.
Wow. And so did you always know you were going to go back and get your master's? At what point did you make that decision?
Yeah, so that was kind of an interesting journey too. I had a lot of people in my ear giving me a difficult time about my choice of college path. So I worked in a pharmacy, in an inpatient hospital pharmacy, which was the coolest job ever to do while I was getting my bachelor's. I was like mixing IVs for people. I was bringing medication to hospital floors. It was a really great job. And I worked with many people who were in pharmacy school, and they're like, why don't you go to pharmacy school? You're going to make a lot more money. It's going to be a much more, sustainable job. Like, what are you doing? And so I think ultimately I was like, I just don't really have the means to go to pharmacy school. I can't go away to school. I need to work. Like, it just didn't make sense. And I also just was passionate about psychology at that point. Like I mentioned, I was excited about it. I liked working in the pharmacy, but my heart was set on psychology.
And why the social work route versus, say, counseling, psychology route?
Yeah, and that was a tough call. So like working on the psychiatric unit, and I thought I would do psychology for my master's because I loved my bachelor's. I loved counseling. I figured I would be a therapist. That was my kind of path that I expected. But then through some great connections that I met through the hospital, I had a couple of really great mentors. And I talked to one individual who was a PsyD, and he was one of my best mentors. And he was like, he's a PsyD, a doctor in psychology, and he really pushed me towards social work. He was like, social work is going to give you so many different options. He said, even if you want to be a therapist, a lot of the times people are looking for social workers in their therapy practices. And if you go into social work, you can work in hospitals, you can work in schools, you have all of these different options. And what I did know about myself is that I get bored with things. Maybe a little undiagnosed ADHD here and there. So I knew that I would enjoy a field where I could kind of change things up if I wanted to. So that's kind of what drove me towards social work. And it's interesting because I had this negative mindset about social work because I grew up in a home where we would have child welfare come. And if you grow up in a home where child welfare, child protective services was in the home, what you learn about social workers is that they're bad and that they're there to take you away from your parents. So I had to really look at that mindset and really challenge those paradigms that I had built from, my upbringing. So it was a journey, but I had these strong connections. The one PsyD, he really helped me out. And there was another strong mentor that I had that also pushed me towards social work. So yeah, I wanted that variability and options.
You mentioned, so you were a first-generation college student?
Correct.
Then?
Yeah.
Do you recall your graduation ceremony for either your bachelor's or master's? And,
oh, yeah.
Yeah, so that's a big deal, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It also sounds like you had some trauma in your family background, so I was wondering or curious, did you have family members attend? And
I did.
Did you have good relationships with some family members?
Yeah, so my family situation was, it was tough. I had a sibling who struggled with substance abuse, many incarcerations, and, there was just a lot of conflict, a lot of violence, just kind of constant turmoil going on in the home. But I always had a really positive relationship with my dad. He was always kind of this chill guy that just kind of went with the flow, never overly emotional, but he was there and consistent. And my mom, it was up and down with. My mom tended to connect more with the sibling who was unwell. They kind of had a dynamic, but ultimately at my undergraduate graduation, both my parents came. My mom only made it for a short period of time, but my dad sat through the whole thing, and I remember him being in tears and being really, really sweet. So it was really special.
And that's a good memory, I'm assuming.
Yeah, it was really special. Yeah.
Well, as you mentioned your dad, the next question is, as you think back to where your journey started, where you knew that you wanted to help those who were struggling, what person or people helped kind of shape that? What connections did you make early in your life, or even a little bit later? You mentioned a couple of mentors, so that might be one of the people you want to mention. And just go a little bit deeper on that.
Yeah. I actually think about this a lot, being a social worker, working with young people. And we know from research that it just takes one adult figure in a person's life to help them feel heard, validated, to help them be successful. So I do reflect on this often. And I actually think that it was really a ripple effect. Like, it wasn't an immediate kind of change that happened. But when I was in high school, that was some of the hardest time. Those were the hardest times of my life. In addition to just going through adolescence and all the changes that happen, things were really tough at home. So I felt really disconnected from my home life. And then at school, there was a lot of turmoil going with just relationships and peers and things like that. So I really, my mental health was not in a good place. And I felt really alone. And I had this one vocational teacher, Mr. Brady. He's so fun. So I studied electronics. That was my vocation that I chose to do. And I would be with him 2 or 3 periods a day, depending on what year it was. So I would be with Mr. Brady, and I would be sharing with him like some of the things that were going on at home. And he just really listened, and he really believed in me. So throughout my time with him, not only did he listen and provide support, but when there were opportunities, he always helped connect me with those opportunities. He noticed that I really was great with video and audio production, so he set me up to record field day and do all the editing for that. He gave me a lot of responsibilities and allowed me to have that mastery that can be so rewarding for kids, and that I didn't have a lot of experience with before that. And then the thing that I always think about is my senior year. He wanted to connect me with an internship with our local TV station, and he was so excited. He's like, this is going to open huge doors for you. You can end up working in New York City someday and doing production, and this is going to be a huge thing for you. And unfortunately, I said, I can't do this internship. I need to be paid. I need to use my extra time for my hospital shifts so that I can get paid and pay my rent. I can't live with my parents. It's just not a sustainable thing for me right now. So I didn't take that internship, but he still helped me so much, just believing in me, just giving me that mastery, and that ripple effect of him believing in me and giving me that confidence that I never would have had to know that I could do big things and that I could be successful, and that there were people that would help me along the way. That meant so much.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
So after your master's, tell me about the rest of your career journey, and take us up to the point where you joined the Lincoln Center, and tell us how that came to be.
Okay. Yeah. So I graduated from Westfield State University in Massachusetts, where I grew up. I did that in 2018. And for my last year of my graduate program, I did internships in schools. It was such a good internship. I got experience with kids pre-K all the way through 12th grade. So I was able to work at a couple of different schools and get a lot of great experience, and I loved it. I was like, I never thought I really wanted to work with kids, but this was just really special, really rewarding, and it felt preventative, and it felt like a nice upstream approach after working inpatient, doing a lot of reactive work. So when I moved to Pennsylvania after graduating, I got some really great experience over the years. I was able to do work in a bunch of different schools. I was working as a student assistance program counselor. So I was teaching elementary school kids, social emotional lessons. I was going into high schools and doing assessment with kids and getting them set up with outside providers.
Yeah.
And I did that for about a year, and then I worked for Philadelphia School District for 2 years, working right in an elementary school in North Philly, doing individual therapy, group therapy, a lot of behavior management work, teacher coaching, professional development for teachers. And while I did that, I also, of course, always having multiple jobs. I worked for Mainline Health, so I worked in their emergency rooms doing crisis assessments, and I worked on their psychiatric unit doing case management work. So over those couple of years, I got some really great experience. I got to work on my licensure for my clinical license, and then I moved to Downingtown School District kind of for a more manageable commute for myself. And then towards the end of my pregnancy with my now 2-year-old daughter, I switched to just working part-time. So I stayed just with Mainline Health with my part-time role there. And then I was with Mainline Health after I came back from maternity leave, and I went over to their Women's Emotional Wellness Center, and I did therapy and groups and things like that over there. I developed a really cool DBT program. And so here we are.
Well, we're certainly happy to have you.
Yeah, thank you.
You just mentioned DBT just a moment ago. For the listeners who may not know what that is, talk about DBT, but also just talk about some of the other modalities that you're familiar with that you've used in your practice.
Yeah, I love DBT. DBT stands for dialectic behavior therapy. And the dialectics in DBT, it's all about opposing beliefs and truths and holding them together in harmony and finding acceptance with that. A lot of DBT is around acceptance, emotional regulation, kind of looking at a lot of the thoughts that we have and how they can fall into cognitive distortions like black and white thinking or all or nothing thinking or catastrophizing and helping us navigate those, and also bringing in a lot of mindfulness strategies to help us regulate our bodies and feel in control of our thoughts and our behaviors. So,
and how's that similar or different from cognitive behavioral therapy?
Yeah, good question. So part of what I just said is pretty much cognitive behavior therapy, where we're looking at the cognitive distortions. But DBT kind of takes it another step with both the mindfulness component, and it also brings in more of the focus on the dialectics, where it's the opposing beliefs, the opposing truths, kind of bringing those together and, kind of finding acceptance there.
You mentioned ADHD earlier. You said you self-diagnosed.
Yeah.
And I guess so first of all, ADHD and ADD is part of my history as well with my family. And so I've had children officially diagnosed, and we've had other family members informally, unofficially diagnosed. Mm-hmm. And I've found that it can be a strength as well as a weakness in school settings and professional settings. And so I was just wondering if you could comment on that a little bit, and how did you come about self-diagnosing, and did it mostly help or mostly hurt, or a combination of the both?
That's such a great question. I really love that view of taking something that's really pathologized and noticing how it can be such a strength and exploring that piece. So I do think that there's a huge benefit to having a way of thinking. I find that people who have ADHD, they do tend to like changing things up frequently. So they might do better in a role professionally where things change a lot, which are working in a school. You are never going to be doing the same thing every day. You are going to have to be flexible. You're going to have to, run around with a kid outside 1 minute and then be talking to a kid about their emotions the next second. So I think that does really suit individuals for a job in a school or in any kind of job where there's a lot of changes, a lot of flexibility and prioritizing. Even though I do find that I have a lot of distractibility, I'm not someone who can sit and read a book or anything like that. I do think that I have a strength in looking at what my tasks are and prioritizing what needs to happen at what point. And sometimes it even feels good because I can be it helps me to stay motivated because I know something else is coming at the end of that task, Yeah.
Yeah. Good. Well, thanks for sharing that too.
Sure.
What would you say some of the most challenging aspects of being in social work? And on the flip side, some of the most rewarding experiences in your career as a social worker?
Sure. Wow. I think there's so many things for both. I think one of the most challenging things that I've come across is I think we get excited. We want to go into this field to help people, to provide support, and we feel like we can connect with everyone and help everyone. And especially early in our careers, I think a lot of us have that sort of rose-colored glasses where we are feeling like we can support everyone. And I had a lesson on the psychiatric unit early on that showed me I'm not always going to be able to help people. I'm not always going to be the one that they want to work with. And I think that was a hard thing to learn as a social worker, to learn that there are certain people we're just not going to connect with. There are certain people that just aren't going to be a good fit for us. And that's okay. That's a great opportunity to find someone who's going to be a better fit for them. I think in general, it can be a hard field. I mean, we are listening to some of people's hardest moments, darkest times, and sometimes all we can do is just listen and hear them out, and it can feel kind of helpless, especially working with young people who might be in really tough environments and we have no control over their environment. So I think those pieces can be really tough. I also think that when we do have individuals like that, whether it's an adult or a child, and they have these really difficult environments that they're in that we don't have control over, those can also be some of the more rewarding times because we are that one light in their life where they're able to talk about what they want to talk about. They're able to be safe. They're able to do things or talk about things that maybe they're not safe to talk about at home or in their other spaces that they're at.
Yeah. So you mentioned that some of the clients you work with, they're in really dark places. And so I guess the question is, how do you take care of yourself? And maybe describe the notion of vicarious trauma for the listeners, but also you had mentioned mindfulness earlier as well. And so I'm assuming mindfulness might be one of the ways that you do self-care, but talk about that also.
Sure. Yeah. So first, vicarious trauma is the experience of trauma when you are consistently hearing about it, witnessing it, going through it, when not only are you feeling sad about it, but you start to experience those symptoms of trauma yourself as the professional or as someone else listening to trauma all day. So this is very common for people who are first responders or people working in the mental health field or people working in like emergency rooms, first responders. You wouldn't just be feeling sad. You'd start to feel, high stress levels. You would experience hypervigilance, which means you might be quick to jump or quick to react to something. You might feel really irritable all the time, and it's uncharacteristic for you. So those are some ways that someone might experience vicarious trauma. And so it is really, really important if you're a mental health professional or if you are a first responder or if you're working in any kind of high stress, high trauma environment, then you do have to really practice really good self-care. And I think what's the most important for self-care that I've learned over the years is knowing that it's different for everyone. And just because your sister likes to go to yoga or do massages or this or that, that doesn't mean that's going to be the right thing for you. Yeah. For me, I've learned that definitely mindfulness is helpful. My way of practicing mindfulness is getting out in nature and being really present with what I see, what I feel in terms of like the air on my skin, the smells that I'm experiencing, the sounds. So I really kind of indulge my senses when I'm outside and going for a walk or spending time with my dog. And connections are really big for me in terms of self-care as well, where I know that I am filled up when I have time with my friends. I know if I don't have time to connect with people outside of work for, a couple weeks, I start to feel pretty down. So I like having that unstructured time to connect with people.
So when you go out into nature, is that typically by yourself or you're going with your friends? Or
It's both. Yeah,
Right.
I'd say if I'm feeling really stressed and I kind of need it, like I can see that my cup is empty and I need to refill, I would probably choose to do it alone at that point. But I think on a regular basis, just for like regular maintenance of self-care, I will include friends, or I'll go with my husband, or I'll take my dog, or whatever.
Yeah. What common misperceptions do people have about social work that you would like to address?
Oh, so many. I mean, the first one would stem back to my childhood, right? I think I grew up thinking that all social workers were here to take kids away from their families. I think that's one of the basic ones that still exists in society. That's really sad, and that even social workers do a bunch of different things. First of all, I think sometimes people think that they might just work in child protective services, but social workers work in doctors' offices and hospitals and schools all over the place. Social workers can do so many different things. And even if they are working in CPS and child protective services, that's the last thing they want to do. They don't want to take kids away. Like that's not the goal. The goal is always to strengthen the family. Research shows that kids do best with their biological family. So that's the goal. And of course, the other one is that you can't make a living as a social worker. I think that's kind of a frustrating stigma that we have in our field, and that I think it creates this mindset of social workers too, where they go into the workforce and they just say, oh, I'm going to be paid poorly, and it just is what it is. I don't need to ask for more money. I just can let this happen. But I think that we need to advocate for ourselves just like we advocate for our clients. We deserve to make a living. Just because we're in our jobs to help people doesn't mean that we don't deserve to make a living and to be compensated for our experience and our many years of work. So I'm really passionate about that. So I've done a lot of sort of like get-togethers and groups talking about advocacy for women and social workers, and advocating for more pay.
At TLC, we hire educators, counselors, all different types of mental and behavioral health positions. But social workers is one of the hardest to recruit for. There seems to be a shortage, at least locally. I haven't done the research nationally.
Sure.
But why is that? Why is it so hard why are there less social workers than there are jobs?
I would speculate. I don't know what the research would tell us, but I would speculate that part of it is the stigma about money. And with us seeing like a big increase in cost of living expenses, and, real estate getting so increasingly expensive and things of that nature, I think that is probably one of the reasons. I would say probably part of it too would be the other challenges that come with the work, that it is emotionally difficult work, and that people are seeing that more and more. And maybe they're seeing that that if you don't have a strong self-care plan, if you don't have that commitment to take care of yourself and your wellness, that you can kind of deteriorate. You can have a really hard time. So that might be kind of pushing people away, but it's a good question.
All right. Well, I'm looking forward to having you back. And we'll dig deeper in social work and counseling and trends and various modalities for treatment. And so we got so many more things to talk about. And thank you for your time.
So many things. Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.
All right. Take care.
TLC Connections is supported in part by the Lincoln Center for Family and Youth. Through education, counseling, coaching, and consulting, we empower people to make positive choices, meaningful connections, and transformational change. To learn more, visit thelincolncenter.com.